Welcome to the Costa Rica Travel and Living Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Baker. This is the podcast that discusses everything travel and living related to this part of the world here in Central America. Today, my guest is the CEO and co-founder of Costa Rican Vacations, part of the Namu Travel Group, Casey Halloran. Casey and I go back a very long time, and I was very keen to get him on the podcast so we could discuss the topic of successfully growing your business here in Costa Rica. Casey's a wealth of knowledge, especially when it comes to marketing, internet marketing, business planning, and strategy. So I was keen to discuss this topic with him. Casey first came to Costa Rica in the mid-90s, and then just before the millennium spotted a gap in the market for high-end online travel here to Costa Rica. Shortly after that, he created the successful business today, the Namu Travel Group, that offers experiences to 6 different destinations in Central America and is still growing and is an industry leader here in the region. If you're enjoying these series, please give us a like or a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe as well to never miss an episode. So without further ado, let's jump in to my conversation with Casey. Casey Halloran, great to have you on the podcast. How are you doing?
Good, Adam Baker. How you doing?
I'm not bad, thanks. It's been a while. I'm glad to have you. I believe I was one of your first guests on the Let's Talk Tourism podcast, for those that don't know.
Just returning the favor here,
huh? As ever, we are doing the rounds. For those of our listeners, Casey, that don't know you directly, I always start the question is, how did your Costa Rica journey begin? And why start a business here?
It's so weird because I think probably my journey to here began like 26 years ago. And I honestly can't even remember the precise moment when the words Costa Rica first got into my head. But I studied abroad during university in San Sebastian, Spain. And that was sort of my first taste at living abroad. And within days or weeks, I was like, all right, this is what I want to do. And then what shaped Central America or the tropics in my head, one, I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, and I'm never going to be cold again. Decided that a long time ago. And two, I went to school with, I think, 9 Panamanians, years ahead and behind me. And so they were always, whispering in my ear, Panama. And then at some point I went to Barnes and Noble, which for, people who aren't as old as me, that was a bookstore. Remember books?
Yeah, I still remember Barnes and Noble.
Yeah. Remember reading?
Yeah.
And on the shelf of living abroad, working abroad, there were really only books on Argentina, Venezuela, and then Costa Rica oddly punching above its weight with several books. So I bought all of them, read them all, and I was like, man, this Costa Rica place sounds kind of interesting. And like a lot of people, you're like, where is it? Right?
Yeah, especially back then.
Most people just I'm talking late 90s, didn't really know Central America that well, except for perhaps Civil War issues during the 80s. And I looked out on the internet, which was a brand new thing in 1998, dialing up. And there were an odd number of, and this is pre-Google, mind you, and there were an odd number of websites for Costa Rica. And so I thought, man, if this tiny little country already has an ecosystem of small businesses that understand the internet, I think I can do something there. And that was just it. And it was kind of a lucky guess, particularly knowing that Argentina's had like 5 booms and busts since. And Venezuela is almost unrecognizable compared to whatever it was in the late 90s. It just kind of got lucky.
You say lucky guess, but had you traveled a bit before into Costa Rica with your family before this, or was that after? Only once?
So one time we came down here for New Year's in a newly opened resort in Papagayo, which was also hilarious.
Yeah.
A resort barely finishing in time, which I think it had has been rebranded maybe 5 times at this point. I don't even know what it's called now.
Yeah.
And I thought, man, this Guanacaste place is pretty neat. The Liberia Crossroads there where the Burger King is. There was
Yep.
nothing there.
Yep. Flat.
Nothing. Um, and we flew into Liberia, and I thought, all right, this is pretty cool. And then my parents had both sold their small businesses. My little sister was in 7th grade, and we all did a Swiss Family Robinson sort of year, living in a rural part of Escazú, which at that time still had horses and cattle
Yeah.
running around. Yeah.
It's crazy to think that far back. So obviously you spotted a gap. You had some very limited experience here, and this is pre-millennium. So going into 99, when Costa Rican Vacations was founded at the end of that year before the turn of the century, how quickly then, when you found this gap and you saw that this was something that was very plausible, you obviously then had a few years later in Panama. How quickly do you think you knew this is where you were going to base some of your extensive life, personally and on a business level?
So I think for probably the first 2 years that I was here, this is just a good time, right? I mean, I was having a blast. I'd started a consulting business, so I was just building websites and helping small businesses direct market. And I had an online directory where I copied the yellow pages and digitized it.
Yeah.
And I just fell in love with the hotel people. I thought the hoteliers were so cool. A combination of pirates and explorers and also artists. And like those people I'm describing, pretty terrible at business.
Right.
In general, or at least not good at sales and marketing.
Yeah.
And so one day, I came home from consulting, and I think I was frustrated with a tiny travel agent client actually. And I came home and I said to my roommate Tony, said, "Doesn't your mom know something about travel?" He's like, "Yeah, why?" I'm like, we're starting an online travel agency. And that was it.
And bang.
It's just sort of an
There you go.
impulse. Yeah, but even still, it was probably not until we moved from San Pedro to Romoser, because that was the first place with cable internet. When I heard cable internet, I was like, "We're moving."
That was the reason, and that's where you currently are.
That was it.
25 years later, simply because of internet location.
Yeah, fast internet, done. No more dialing up for us.
Yeah.
People forget what that was like.
Yeah.
Get off the phone. I need the internet.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember. Wow.
Even still, Adam, I don't think I probably seriously thought I was going to stay here until maybe year 3, maybe.
But that's still in times of how you've been here for 20 plus years. That's still quite short. When you think about 24 months to 36 months, there's still some people. I remember even at 5 years into my tenure here, it was still, oh, well, there's always a possibility I may move on. I was never really solidifying. I wasn't never really feeling. So, maybe for some people that might be a while, but 3 years. Obviously, so it sounds like you had a warm connection to, you mentioned the hoteliers, those that are crazy, those pirates, and those that are not. I imagine there's still a few of those characters, even 25 years later. I think that would be fair to say.
And I think you kind of have to have that mindset if you're going to survive here long term, particularly in remote places that make for good hotel destinations.
Yeah.
Because I mean, if there's one thing about Costa Rica, and you could probably just say this about the tropics, right? Plans aren't going to go to plan. You have to be a resourceful person who's willing to deal with frequent setbacks and things not working perfectly or on time or having to cobble together solutions. And so that's where these pioneering pirate type personalities just thrive.
Yeah.
Where more square, traditional accountant driven business people might not do so great. Because they want things to fit into the pretty little boxes.
Yeah. Yeah, no. It's a very valid point, for sure. When thinking about this podcast, I had a number of questions that I was trying to limit down. We try and keep it to maybe half an hour. But so some of the questions I have, I think, are very helpful for those interested in coming down and perhaps opening a business. But specifically, how has the business landscape in Costa Rica evolved over recent years, but perhaps, even over 2 decades? What have you seen, and what kind of trends do you foresee shaping its future?
Well, It changed a lot. I mean, you're talking from a lot of dirt roads to a lot of paved roads, lousy internet to fast internet, probably even in some remote parts with satellite internet faster than in a lot of advanced countries. No credit to maybe somewhat too loose credit, which, miserable roads to some pretty good roads, but that may have been offset by loose credit, creating a lot more traffic, a lot more
Right.
cars in the road.
I've seen those
Hard,
changes as well. You talk about cars and credit,
yeah.
even in my time, it's insane.
In some places, you might say difficult to find talent. To now, there's a lot of talent.
Mhm.
A lot of big tech shops showed up down here, and multinationals showed up down here and really leveled up. Brought a lot of high quality management from all over the world and high quality business practices. And those are the ones that occur offhand. I'd say, velocity of capital, just in general, money moving around, this whole access to capital, access to credit, capital markets moving a little bit more quickly. So I think it's really advanced incredibly. I think of almost like, you think of like California in the 40s and 50s where there were still cowboys, to California of 1980 where there's millionaires in every corner.
Yeah.
I think there's some of that here, of that whole cowboy, Wild West mentality, and we've watched parts of the Wild West here grow up.
100%. And I think it's incredibly, I mean, as you say, we're talking about 20 years, 25 years for your time here. I've been here for myself, 18 years. It's incredible how fast it's moved, especially in terms of infrastructure investment. Do you still see that growth curve, positive, or do you see that either tailing off, or what kind of obstacles do you see that may occur the next 3 to 5 years? Difficult to project.
Yeah, it's hard, but I think the place we can probably look for some clues might be Hawaii, maybe also Mexico. My concern for Costa Rica at this particular odd moment in time, a post-COVID moment in time, where talk about liquidity, what, $40 trillion
Right.
Injected to the economy, and what a lot of that money showed up down here. And this is a tiny country,
Yeah.
a state the size of, I don't know, Maryland, half of Virginia. What's our population now? Are we at 5 million?
Just over. I think coming up to 6 now. It's pretty going
6
quickly.
million.
Yeah.
So when all of a sudden global wealth finds Costa Rica interesting, we've gone from, to see a $3 million home at the beach here used to be a big deal.
Yeah.
Now it's just not.
Run of the mill.
So, and so my concern is that this whole sort of funky, bootstrapped millionaire class is now getting supplanted by a lot of financial and .com tech billionaire class. I don't know how many billionaires we've got down here, maybe half a dozen. Wild guess. But there are certain neighborhoods in this country where when one of those comes to town, all the dynamics change really, really fast. I know that's been the case in a couple communities in Hawaii. And I don't necessarily know that it always works out for the best. And particularly in the case of Costa Rica, one of the things that has always made this country so awesome is how rich people and celebrities can walk around down here and nobody cares.
Yeah.
And I'm concerned that now the power dynamics and the difference between the haves and the have-lesses is so ridiculous that we might lose some of that pura vida where everybody kind of gets along and there's not necessarily the tension that you have in other destinations.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, when you think to those areas that you're referring to, the challenge is whether this bubble or boom eventually stops, and then how is that exit managed of large wealth, whether we're looking at Santa Teresa or areas that have had a large investment, real estate, Playa Grande, Northern Tamarindo. I've had a number of guests on this podcast who talk about, again, the the overpopulation of any given area, the infrastructure that is then not in place needs to be massively pushed. And it does create, whether it's tension or it, again, changes the culture. I guess we'll wait and see. It seems, Hawaii's
we
not
don't,
doing.
we don't know yet, right?
Yeah.
I think that there's sort of there's two things that concern me a little bit. One is this degree of FU money that we've never really seen here before. We've always had the Gisele Bundchens,
Yeah.
the occasional Jack Dorsey.
Yeah. The odd Mel Gibson here and there.
Right. But back in the old days, it was more like Woody Harrelson and the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yeah.
It was more driven by passion. And I think maybe a shared values deep down of this place resonates with me, as opposed to I will smash it down and recreate it in my image. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And what's made Costa Rica so awesome, particularly in these remote destinations, is there's so much passion behind these projects, because on paper, none of it makes sense. You know what I mean? And so now if it's more driven by ego or by your CFO approves it because it absolutely makes sense on paper, I think we might lose some of the soul that makes this place really unique. Because everybody talks about this all the time. There's prettier beaches in the Caribbean.
Sure.
There's more interesting cultures in Mexico. There's better food in Peru.
Yeah.
There's a lot of places where you can say this is better, that's better. But we have this Pura Vida thing is real. And man, if you lose that, I'm not sure it can be recovered.
No, it's a good point. It talks to the people and the essence of the culture as to what ignited this, whether you call it a movement or interest globally in the country for whatever reason. And you bring up a good point. Obviously, when I discuss this a lot, if you come in and you want to impose your culture against a culture that already exists, that's never going to go well. You ask one of the questions of your podcast. I'd like to turn it around to you. You mentioned Pura Vida there. What is Pura Vida to you, having spent 25 years plus now here?
Yeah, I mean, my sort of aha in the pandemic, when you're like, okay, if everything's at risk and we're all financially dead anyway, what really matters? And when I'm telling, Bakes, I've known each other a long time. When it comes to mission statements and vision statements and corporate values, I'm such a hater because I think so many big businesses, it's all lip service.
Right.
And I used to just sort of tongue in cheek, think this Pura Vida thing was just a marketing ploy. But I think, and again, how do you put your finger on these things?
Yeah.
For me, it's this balance. And particularly the more you travel, the more you go other places, the more you can put into words and appreciate what it is about this place that's so magnetic. And I think this place has a lot of balance. And part of that's probably that we're near the equator. We have Pacific, we have Caribbean, we have Black people, we have white people, we have indigenous people and Spanish people. Yeah. There's a lot of things here in balance. And so my definition of Pura Vida is this balance. And there's probably a lot of different sub factors, fingers on the scale. But to me, it's local community, nature, tourist, and I'm forgetting one, culture. Where like when these things are balanced, when everybody's adding and taking something away, and no one's putting their hand in the pot twice.
Yeah,
it works. But the thing that got us to this point is, as long as the local person and the local culture doesn't feel like it's giving up too much, then they're happy to have the billionaire guy put up his obnoxious house.
It's right? The harmony between those elements.
And that's a great word. So to me, that's where I now can sort of feel and enunciate this Pura Vida thing. It's this balance between these stakeholders that make it go around and make it keep going around.
Yeah. That's a nice segue to a question I had a little bit later on, but I want to ask you now, how do you find your work-life balance? Obviously, managing as a founder and a CEO of a business, as a family guy, how do you manage that day-to-day balance? But how do you manage it in Costa Rica? And how do you think that might compare to some of your friends or colleagues in the US or North America?
I got really lucky. I worked a couple summers with my college bestie out in the Hamptons, and we worked at the Hampton Athletic Club. And I grew up in a small town with one stoplight and 5,000 people. And I always thought that these captains of industries must have like figured out the secrets of life.
Uh-huh.
And never meet your heroes.
Yeah.
I could not believe what colossal disappointing humans a lot of these titans of industry who were jet setting from New York City to the Hamptons every weekend were. And you talk about work-life balance, these people had it all wrong.
Yeah.
The kids were a disaster, the wives were cheating, the husbands were cheating. I just couldn't. I was, as a hayseed from the country, I was stunned. I really
Eye-opening.
was.
Yeah.
And so that was sort of my first eye opener into, oh, okay, I guess I'm not doing that.
Right.
So if I had stayed in the US and stayed in a decent sized metro and tried to climb the corporate ladder, I think I saw, that ghost of Christmas future,
Yeah.
awful reality for me.
You had a vision that
Yeah.
helped the next few decades.
Yeah. So certainly my work-life balance has changed over the years down here, but the nice part of being a stranger in a strange land is you don't feel any compulsion to keep up with the Joneses. My joke here is keeping up with the Jimenez, or
Right.
I guess
Of course.
maybe the Quiros. I'm not part of that culture. They don't want me. I don't really want in.
Yeah.
So it's liberating. That's one of the great things of being an expat. I think a foreigner in a foreign country is the ads don't work on me.
Yeah.
Magazine commercials don't work on me. It's not for me, right?
Uh-huh.
So in that sense, I get to choose what I value. The older I get, and now having two small kids, I think I probably put a little more emphasis on the life part than the work.
Yeah.
My wife would probably disagree. But I mean, my personal business life hack is I only have one calendar, business and personal. And
Yeah.
and if I'm going to have any time with my wife, any time with my kids, it's on my corporate calendar.
Yeah.
And therefore, when I don't have it, I can see it.
Sure. It's a good way. It's a good way of managing the time. I mean, obviously in this country, kind of, it gives itself to getting away to beautiful locations very quickly. Whether you could be in a metro area, right, and perhaps you've got one or two different landscapes to see every weekend. But here, being based in the center of the country, you can be on the Pacific coast within an hour. Beautiful resorts. We're very lucky to be working in tourism, so we get the best of both worlds. I find maybe it's an advantage of the geography and the size of the country, but it's always diverse and it's always different. And raising kids here, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it's not hard, in particular since we work in travel, it's not hard to make an excuse to go somewhere or see
Yeah.
something. And the other thing I would say is if you're a type A, Northeast, air quotes, asshole type personality, this country is going to grind you into dust.
Yeah. Yeah, they
You know what I'm
don't
saying?
suffer fools.
Yeah, they're masterful at the jujitsu of passive aggressiveness of they'll just smile and nod and you're
Yeah.
not and over time you're not going to get your way. So I think that this country is really great at sort of weeding those folks out over time. And for people like me who probably started out type A asshole, yeah, when in Rome, you just slowly but surely become a lot more chill. You don't have a
Yeah.
choice.
You have to be open as well to that cultural shift. Because if you don't, it can take 10 years of patience, depending on the type of personality, to get used to living here. And that's why it isn't for everybody. That's the whole idea of this podcast, is to discuss travel and living here, because it isn't for everybody. And you should have that extended stay if you're coming to, stay, work, live, travel, see if it's right for you, but give yourself enough time, because it isn't easy.
And also, the beauty of it, it's so funny when you talk to older folks and they recount to you their youth of where, they were living in a lousy apartment or, where nothing worked. There's a
Yeah.
nostalgia for these things, right? And I think, did you ever see the Louis C.K. skit where he talks about how amazing flying is and all anybody does is complain?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. It's a while ago.
And he mentions that the first time they announced the in-flight Wi-Fi, it wasn't working, and the guy next to him got angry. It's like something you didn't know about 5 minutes ago.
Of
Now
course.
you feel
Of
entitled
course.
to it.
Yeah.
So one of the beauties I think of things here being kooky and not being perfect. Specifically, like, do you ever shop here? I never shop here. I don't buy anything here.
Uh-huh.
It's so expensive and the variety stinks. Like, why would I go to the mall?
Yes.
Right. So what happens eventually is you just stop shopping.
You realize it's not
Right.
actually a necessity. Yeah.
Yeah. And so a lot of these things that initially you thought were so important, whatever it is, right, that I have to have the latest model iPhone or
Yeah.
car, well, you're not going to get that. Or if you are, it's going to take time.
And it's going to cost you
So
twice as much.
yeah. So what's nice is, go, I guess I don't need it.
Yeah. It kind of brings you back to the absolutely important things because you have the time to think about them.
Yeah.
Very valid.
Yeah. And one of the things that's non-negotiable for Costa Ricans is time off, spending time with family.
Yeah. And that's that's a big cultural shift, I think, as well, even for parts of Europe, at least for me, a lot warmer. Families are very, very close. That work life, you do turn the computer off. And it's definitely a custom of the culture here. And I think it's a very positive thing. I have a couple more questions. I want to ask you one more question regarding businesses specifically. What were some of the challenges that you faced in the last couple of years in growing your business? What challenges might businesses face generally whilst expanding in Costa Rica, and how have you overcome them?
I think it depends massively on the type of business, right, and the industry. But I think for most small businesses, small mid-sized business down here, the early challenges are going to be capital. It's not like the banks here are tough. Interest rates are ultra high.
Yeah.
There's not some thriving venture capital community here that's eager to lend, especially to foreigners with unproven business. So access to capital is a big deal. Managing talent, the cultural learnings of how to manage a Costa Rican versus however you may have managed or motivated people back home. I mean, I think until you've truly become bicultural, which I don't even know if I am approaching 3 decades down here,
Mm-hmm.
can you think like a local? Can you structure incentives and motivations and rewards and compliments in a way that actually work down here? Because despite whatever you're doing, most businesses is a people business. And so I'd say that, really understanding and adapting to the culture is a big deal. I think a lot of businesses think, oh, we'll bring the 3M way or the Coca-Cola handbook down here.
Yeah.
And the phrase that gets thrown around a lot down here is you got to tropicalize that. Like, yeah, you've got your way of doing things. Now you got to run it through the tropical translator and see if it's still going to work.
See if it
So
works.
I'd say those are the two big ones, is probably the human capital, HR, cultural thing, and access to capital.
Yeah. Very valid. And it's always very easy to discuss challenges. But what would you say are some of the upsides, the advantages
Of doing business in Costa Rica?
Yeah.
Working with nice people.
Right.
The flip side to that would be you've got to smoke out conflict sometimes.
Uh-huh.
But I would imagine, and I would say, in general, honest people. I think there's maybe a misconception of folks who come down here for the first time of like, how honest is Latin America or how honest is Costa Rica? I think those are super general questions. But my general experience, and I'd have to go back and look at how many staffers we've had over 25 years. I would guess it's 500 plus.
Yeah.
I've had very good experience in terms of honesty, integrity, and whatnot.
Uh-huh. It makes a difference.
Yeah, I mean, maybe part of that is having good management, good people leading other people. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
I think it's a good mix. You find that secret sauce over the years. You find the right people in any culture, right?
Yeah.
But again, sorry.
I'm sorry. I was going to say the other thing that I think makes this an interesting place to be in terms of doing business. We're at the crossroads of North and South America. It's an important geographic region. We've got Panama next door that's growing like crazy. Copa Airlines growing like crazy. The canal growing like crazy. I think there's just a lot of positive activity. And unlike maybe Europe or parts of the United States where permitting is a nightmare, legal red tape is a nightmare. I'm not saying it's easy here,
Yeah. Yeah.
but things do tend to move fairly quickly once you get them moving.
Hmm.
And here we're not growing by 2% a year. Here there's chances for these big leaps forward that I think is really exciting. A chance to have bigger impact than you might have in a Silicon Valley where you're one of many gazillionaires. And I think the other thing is we have a thriving and an interesting expat community.
Right.
So it's become this really interesting melting pot of talented people from all over the place.
Yeah.
I think that's thrilling.
Yeah, it's very exciting to see the different kind of the different, not just the different markets opening up, but the different people that are coming to actually stay longer, and with more investment. Like you say, you encourage more talent to come in. Quite exciting prospect. It's a good question for one of my penultimate questions. Is we work in the tourism specifically, but how do you foresee the tourism industry evolving, perhaps in the next 3 to 5 years, and how might that govern any future business decision you make?
Well, the sort of question at the moment, there's two anxious questions being asked inside the industry at the moment.
Right.
One is security, because we have enjoyed an unprecedented period of peace and quiet in Costa Rica that is not normal for the region, right?
Yeah.
And we've had little moments in the last few years where there's been a lot of concern. And I don't mean domestically, I'm talking more of the drug trade and just crime in general, of like, ooh, or is that at risk?
Yeah.
That's probably number one, or risk at the moment. The other one that I hope is a passing phase is this exchange rate issue. Costa Rica is increasingly being seen, perceived, and correctly so, as an expensive destination. It is not affordable to travel here. It really
Right.
isn't. And
Yeah.
part of that is our exchange rate. And I've yet to have anyone explain to me in a way that my one semester of econ brain could gather
Yeah.
why our exchange rate is so unfavorable to the US dollar at the moment. So those are two things that I think are interesting for the midterm. Long term, we need to make more destinations. We can't keep crowding everybody into the same 5 places.
Yeah.
So that's, I think it's a huge challenge, but also a massive opportunity. Not everybody wants to go to the same 5 places. There's always someone who wants to go somewhere new and interesting. We still have gobs and gobs of coastline.
Yeah.
We still have lots of interesting mountains. We have lots of hidden hot springs. We just need the right, uh, we need the right synchronicity to occur where some of these investors decide to take a risk and go a little off the beaten path.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of opportunity for extended vacations and working holidays. And I think we're going to see this merger of Airbnbs and hotels at some point. I think you're going to see a lot more small hotels with more villa and rental offerings, and more villa offerings that also have hotels next to them. Up to
Yeah.
now, that's really only been the mega players who could figure that out and afford it. But I think the smart hoteliers or the smart tourism operators who enter now realize you kind of got to have both.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a fine line, and it's something that I definitely think is going to converge very soon. I don't think we'll be waiting long. Casey, before I leave you, what's your one top tip, your one piece of advice for any new entrepreneur or someone coming down here to start a business? What would you recommend?
Well, when I got here, they said the secret was if you want to become a millionaire, bring two.
Right. Yeah. Costa
Uh,
Rica.
I think you need to really, really, really want to be here. If your principal motivation is money, I think there are probably way easier places to make a buck.
Yeah.
So I think for a lot of the folks who are just considering investing here or just considering moving here specifically for business, I think there's easier places for business. Uh, if ROI or return on capital is your principal goal, but I think we have that. There's a hidden line item on the ledger here that they always told me existed in business school, but I've never seen anybody necessarily trade on this. Maybe you get to sell at a multiple on this in the end. But and the thing is goodwill. And I think there's a massive amount of goodwill that one feels and enjoys as a result of doing business here. So if you're willing to sort of blender your Jack Welch books with your Tony Robbins books, then you kind of might have a secret for success.
You find that balance, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that is the secret sauce or the pura vida of Costa Rica business.
Yeah.
Is you gotta kind of be in it for the love.
I agree. And I feel very fortunate to be one of those people that became an expat very young. So it feels like I got ahead of the game maybe 20 or 30 years. And for those of us that moved down in our 20s or 30s, we've got a few more decades to appreciate the happiness that the country brings, which I think is sometimes very underrated. That's important to remember. Casey, thank you very much for your time. I know you're a busy man, so I appreciate it. Hopefully some of those answers helped any budding investors or entrepreneurs alike before heading down.
Thanks, Adam.
No worries. If anybody wants to reach out to you and asking any business questions, your information will be below. I'm sure you'll get straight back to them.
Thanks, Adam.
Fantastic, Casey. Take care. We'll be in touch.
Have a great weekend.
You too. I hope all of you entrepreneurs out there and business owners alike enjoyed that conversation with Casey as much as I did. Incredibly insightful to look to the future, but also discuss some of the topics that Costa Rica has been facing in the last couple of decades, and also how it's grown impressively over that time frame. If you have any questions for Casey, you can find his information in the contact details below, and I'm sure he'll get back to you on any subject, whether it's marketing, business strategy, or growth, or even just tourism in this part of the world. As ever, please don't forget to give us a like or a thumbs up if you enjoyed this episode, and of course, subscribe to follow along wherever you get your podcasts. If you have any questions for me, or perhaps questions about future episodes that we haven't addressed yet, please let me know in the description box below if you're watching on YouTube, and I'll be more than happy to get straight back to you. I've been your host, Adam Baker, and until next time, hasta la próxima.